we were really heading for a cliff. We were heading for a cliff and we're on fire. So we're putting out the fire while I'm trying to turn the whole business at the same time. And so I kept doing the same stuff I normally would do to fix the problem. And it was working worse and worse and worse and worse. The revenue was already ticking down and it just nosedived. And I realized, like, I'm 43. I can't kind of f around anymore, right? So if it doesn't work this time, I need to just go do something else.
Welcome back to another episode of Good Work. My name is Barrett Brooks. I'm your host, and I thought I'd share a little message with you at the beginning of this episode. If you've been listening for a while, then you've probably heard that I've been kind of adapting how I talk about the show here in my intros. If you're a new listener, well, welcome into kind of the sausage making here. This show has always been a podcast about how to make an impact with your career. But as I continue to talk about the show to different people, what I've learned is that language doesn't always resonate. And I'm getting more clear on how to talk about it and who it's for along the way. So I thought I'd give you a little look behind the scenes at kind of how I'm thinking about this. And what I found is that the way to talk about it the best, that resonates most, seems to be that everyone that comes on the show has three things in common. Number one, they're world-class at what they do, or they're on the path to being world-class at what they do. Number two, they are making great money doing it. And great money means different things to different people, but certainly everyone on the show is earning a healthy living doing whatever it is that they're world-class at. And third, everyone that comes on the show has a really strong orientation towards being of service to the world, being of service to their community, to their families, to their customers. And ultimately, that all adds up to what I call making an impact. The goal of the show, though, is really to give you many different examples of the kinds of people who are using their careers as a massive lever to make a difference in the world and create change. The kinds of people that I think we should all look up to as role models for the types of careers we might build. So whether you're an early career person or a college student thinking about how to build a career that you'll one day be proud of and that you can become world-class at, whether you're someone who's been in a career maybe for 8 or 10 years and is now looking to make a transition to something that is more meaningful to you and more oriented towards impact and service, or whether you're a longtime professional who's already on a great path and you know you're doing the work you're meant to do, and you just want to hear the stories of peers who are on that path with you. This is a show that's made for you. So that's a little bit behind the scenes. I'm going to continue to adapt how I talk about it so that it resonates with the right people and so that you know how to talk about it when you're trying to share it with others. This is a show about world-class careers and what it takes to build them on the way to making an impact. My guest today is my dear friend named Tim Grahl. Tim is the CEO of a company called StoryGrid, and he's the author of a book called The Shithead, amongst others. The Shithead is his latest book. It is a novel. It's his first novel, if I'm remembering correctly. It might be his second, but it's certainly my favorite book of his, and I've read all of them. It's deeply personal. It's the best writing. It reads a bit like a thriller. And I think it's safe to say it's semi-autobiographical, which we talk a little bit about in today's episode. Tim is also the CEO, as I mentioned, of a company called StoryGrid, which makes this book, The StoryGrid, which is written by Tim's business partner, Shawn Coyne. And they teach people how to structure stories so that they resonate deeply with people, with readers around the world. And they've taken many, many people, hundreds of authors now, and taken them from, I hope I write a book someday, to understanding the important pieces that make a story great and helping them actually put their stories out in the world, often in fiction form. Tim and I talk about a wide-ranging set of topics, but as always, we cover his personal story, why this work matters to him, what he learned being a book marketer for a lot of years, who got a number of well-known books onto best-selling lists, and so much more. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Tim and I are old friends that go way back. And I think one of the most impactful segments we talk about here was what great therapy can do for you and helping you grow as a person and as a professional. So hope you enjoy my conversation with Tim Grahl. Let's get to it. Tim Grahl, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Likewise, all the people I know, I won't offend our friends that way. I'll just say that you fit the idea and goal of this show very well. I always like to give a little bit of like a fun piece of insight into the person I'm talking to as the first question that really has nothing to do with anything other than just who you are. So I thought we'd start with what makes a cruise the perfect vacation?
This may be what we spend the entire time talking about. I warn people, there's only a few subjects you'd get me talking about, and I won't shut up. All right. So I will preface it by saying cruises are not for everybody, and I can steel man the counter argument to cruises are a great vacation. But for me, I love, as somebody who runs a business and has to make constant decisions, a cruise like just drops the amount of decisions you have to make every day to almost zero. So it's like, what are we doing today? I don't know, going to the beach or sitting on the deck reading a book, and it's like, what are we doing tonight? We're going to whatever show's on, where are we eating? We're eating at that place, and that, one of 4 places on the ship. And so I just like, mutual friend of ours, Todd, was like, so did anything exciting happen on your vacation? I was like, no, that's the whole point. 10 days of nothing happening. I like that. I like being near the water, but you don't have to book a car to drive anywhere. You don't have to plan any kind of like, what are we doing tonight? Where are we going to eat? Like any of that. And you get to like see different places. So where people are like, well, what about like an all-inclusive place, like in, Cabo or something? I'm like, well, we've done those. It's just not the same. And so I love it. I love the food. I love not having anything to do and, being near the water, sitting on the balcony in the morning with a cup of coffee and just seeing endless ocean and everywhere you can see. So yeah, absolutely love them. Highly recommend them. And we've switched to Virgin Voyages because they don't allow children. It's 18 and over. And they have almost everything included in the original cost. So there's no like upsells or anything. So yeah, we just got back from a 10-day one, and we've got another one in like 103 days, I think is how long.
I always love the Tim countdown to the next cruise. The next cruise is always booked in Tim's life. I think if I introduced you to someone and I said, what do you think is Tim's preferred mode of vacation? I think very few people would guess cruises. And it's one of my favorite things about you. Just one of these little like random asides.
Yeah. We met at World Domination Summit, which were very like, it was this conference that was very like sell everything, live in an RV, go backpacking, stay at hostels. That was always the vibe. And I'm like, my family's 2 favorite vacations are Disney World and cruises, which are the most like pre-packaged American McDonald's version of vacations. But, that's who we are, I guess.
I love it. It's representative to me of this kind of like class of things that you've prioritized in your life. And in my language, I look at them as you seeking joy, you seeking moments of reprieve from all of the responsibility that you carry, from how seriously you take your work. It's cruises, it's jujitsu, it's intentional time with your sons, it's going on retreats with friends. And I'm curious, like what category of things that occupies from your point of view, and if that's always been a thing that you've known you need, or if that's more of like something you've grown into, knowing that you need these things in your life that aren't these like serious, very important, vital tasks that you've got to tackle every day.
It started as, if we're talking cruises specifically, but just more generally, these things is like, I feel like everything, there's like an intention to it, even if the intention is to like take everything out of my way so I can just relax. When we go to like the conferences or the mastermind that we're a part of, it's specifically to reconnect with old friends and help each other on like mostly business, but also personal side of life. And that's just, I sit in this room alone 99.9% of the time getting work done. And so having like set times where I'm around people, I also think most people in my life that I interact with daily, whether it's my family or, people at the gym or, my kind of normal life friends, don't truly understand what I'm trying to do and why it's so important to me. So I think putting myself around people that I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to try to get them to understand me because they just understand me because they are me. is a really important thing too. It makes me feel normal for that period of time, because most people don't do what I do, and don't do what I do for the reasons I do. So I think that's really important. And then the vacation thing is just, especially this time, it's just a way to like turn it all off for a period of time. So this time was the first time I deleted every work app off my phone: email, Slack, YouTube Studio, like everything off my phone, and just did my absolute best to just check out. And there's really two sides to that. There's the personal family side, and then there's the side of like, if the business can't live without me for a week and a half, then something's wrong with the business. So that side too. But yeah, I think about what I need and what would be good for me, because the way I work helps me get work done, but has some limitations to it.
I'm going to get into that kind of hardworking side next, but I want to take a little detour here based on something you just said. And there's this kind of underrated part of what we do. And I don't even know if I can accurately describe what we do, and we each work a little bit differently, but we're part of this world that for a long time just was not understood by people. It's like you go home, see your parents, or you're at a general friend gathering just in your community. And for the longest time, it was me and our other friend, Corbett Barr. We were both part of a similar friend group here in Portland. And our friends would joke. They'd say like, oh yeah, they do stuff on the internet. And it was funny, but it's also kind of painful because it's not like I just sit here and around on the internet all day, right? Yeah, I actually do work. I make a good living. It's very important to me. I see my work as something that I want to use to make an impact. And so I just wonder what that experience has been like over time to kind of have this world you go into when you step into your office, you step into your studio, you step into the thing that you do every day for a lot of hours every day, but to have most of the world around you not understand it, most of the world that's important to you around you not understand it, just how you've kind of dealt with that over time and how if you have, and how you have tried to bridge that gap.
Honestly, most of the time I like it because it just makes me interesting, right? So it's like whenever somebody asks what I do, I've always had an interesting answer to that question. I'm not an insurance broker. So I like that there's an interesting answer to the question, and it's definitely shifted. It's like doing things on the internet 20 years ago when I was getting started is different than doing things now I'm old on the internet, like I go to these things where we're around, my friends I've now known for 15 years in this space, and we all got gray hair and we're all like old. I don't really worry too much about that. I kind of like it because it makes me interesting, and it also it lets me like avoid questions, so yeah, I don't worry too much about that. I mean, early on, like my parents didn't understand. My mom kept wanting me to work at either Chick-fil-A corporate headquarters or Delta corporate headquarters. And it was about 10 years in that she was like, I finally understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now she works for me. Yeah, I don't worry too much about it. And I've always just liked having an interesting job that has, weird parameters on it. Then I haven't had to show up for work at a certain time since in 18 years. So like when people talk about that, I don't really even remember what that was like.
Yeah. It's funny, having a mom who wants you to work at Delta or Chick-fil-A is like one of these things where it's tell me you're from the South or from Atlanta without telling me you're from Atlanta,
Yeah, one time I got a call from like somebody at Delta because I was interested in a job, and I was like, what? And my mom had put my name in for the job without telling me. So I get these calls. Yeah. There's worse companies to work for than those two, but it wasn't the right route for me.
Yeah. No, I love that your mom works for you now. I got a big old box of books from her one day, and just knowing that she was the one behind the scenes making that happen was a fun little delight factor there. Right. But I want to come back to this other side of things, which is, you just said that for 18 years now you've worked for yourself and you haven't had to go into an office or kind of have that experience of work. And I think sometimes there can be a misconception, both for people who want to get into the type of work that we do, but also for people who are around us, that it's fun or it's not very hard, or, you're just kind of messing around. You're one of the hardest working people I know, like just in terms of energy invested, hours invested, the amount of work that you do to get where you're going is as high as almost anyone. Anyone who has been on the show that's building a, unicorn style VC backed startup, you work just as hard as them or more most days. And I just wonder where that drive comes from for you. Like, what's the root of that drive? Why do you work so hard at what you do every day?
I mean, so this is a multifaceted answer. So one is I started working with my dad when I was 12 years old. He has a Little Debbie distributor route in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta, the ghetto of Atlanta. He would start work at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And so that's when I would start work, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And we would work 12 to 14-hour days. And what he'd like to do was work 3 really, really long days, like a half day, and then be done. So that's what I would do with him. And so this idea of like getting up and just getting the work done as fast as possible and getting it done. He was extremely efficient at his job. At one point, he was the number 2 route for sales in the entire United States. And he was the only one in the top 50 that didn't have somebody working with him full time. It was just him. And it was because he was hardworking, but he was also extremely efficient in his working. So, I mean, it's weird to say, but like my dad, to a certain extent, revolutionized the way Little Debbies are distributed. Like they would fly in managers from all over the country just to ride along with him to see how's he moving so much cake out into the marketplace in such a short period of time. And I mean, all kinds of ways that he like increased the efficiency. So one is literally since I was 12 years old, it was like you work, and when you're working, you're supposed to be getting as much done in as little time as possible. So like when I got my first job at Kroger and like everybody's just kind of standing around, it was driving me crazy. I would just go to my supervisor and just ask them to give me stuff to do because I was bored. Because then all you do is watch the clock. So then you become like the best employee, but I was just trying to make the time go by faster. So that's part of it. The other part of it is like we've gotten close since I've become a harder worker too. So like I think for a long time, I was really more interested in like around and doing cool stuff than I was in running a business that was profitable and would last a long time and, all of those kind of things. So I've always worked a lot, but I haven't always worked from the standpoint of like doing what actually needed to be done and that kind of thing. And a lot is like, I've always been home for dinner with the kids, like I've always like been a good dad and all of that. But especially like there was a moment about a year and a half ago, I was watching an Alex Hormozy video and it was right in this like crux where my business was at a real kind of tough spot. And I was starting to realize I was going to have to like kill 80% of our business and rebuild it in order to make it something that could scale and be sustainable long term. And I forget which one it was. He probably says it all the time, but he was basically like, you just have to work harder. And it was the first time I was like, that I can do. Like, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I'm not, going, whatever that is, but I can outwork people. And so that's when I really just like turned up the notch to an even higher degree of just grind as hard as I possibly can to get to where the company is actually sustainable. We were really heading for a cliff. And so I had to we were heading for a cliff and we're on fire. So we're putting out the fire while I'm trying to turn the whole business at the same time. And I realized like I'm 43. I can't kind of around anymore. Right. So I realized like if it doesn't work this time, I need to just go do something else. Right. Like I can't keep kind of bouncing around doing different things. I need something that's going to build and be sustainable for a long time. And this is kind of like I got 20 years left till like I'm retirement age. So it also became like I've always wanted to build a business that grows and scales. And I think I've been terrified of it for lots of different reasons. And this was enough to be like, all right, it's kind of shit or get off the pot situation. So I'm just going to do whatever it takes. I had a conversation with my wife around this time And I was like, look, I'm going to have to like give everything to this, like literally like all my spare time, all my focus, everything's got to go into this. And she kind of gave me this, from the movie 300. She hasn't seen it, but it felt like the movie from 300 where the wife is like, come back carrying your shield or on it, and I was like, okay. And then that's pretty much all I've done since then.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, you talked about this kind of at the end of your conversation with our friend Nathan Barry, who was on the show a while back, but you didn't have time to really get into it because it was towards the end. You were talking about this turning point. I think it was at the end of 2022, beginning 2023, kind of in that range. And I wonder at what point, like what happened that made you realize, oh man, something's broken here. How did you know, or when did you know that something might be broken in the business?
Yeah, it was November 2022. And we tend to do a pretty big promotion at the end of the year because we have like this membership thing that starts at the beginning of the year. And I was so excited because we had like this new vision, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. And I thought it was going to be our biggest launch ever. And it was just kind of meh. Like the response was very meh. The sales were kind of middle. It wasn't a disaster, but it was not what I thought it would be. And that was when I was like, okay, what we're doing is not resonating with people the way that I think it should. That's a problem. And it wasn't an immediate problem, but it was like, well, that was when I first started realizing like, this is not going to grow into a big company. This is going to be a stagnant company, stagnant and probably slowly dying company. And I'd been a part of those before, and those are like terrible to work for and be a part of. And so that was the moment that I was like, something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but I just felt it like deep in my gut, like this, like, uh-oh, something's wrong. We got to figure out what this is.
So it's got to be one of the most terrifying moments you can have as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, realizing something's broken here, but I don't know what it is. I've had some moments like that. We had some moments like that at ConvertKit, I think, where we just kind of we would see some metrics and realize, man, something's broken here. We don't know how to fix it. It would be easy to stick your head in the sand and just say, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and whatever, I'll figure it out later. But you kind of did the opposite. You like got obsessed with it and you had to figure it out. And you were like a hound dog chasing a raccoon through the woods in Tennessee, to use a local metaphor there for you. I guess the question is like, why? What was different this time for you that made you think, I am going to fix this come hell or high water? And how did you go about trying to do that?
Yeah, so part of it was a little bit of what I said before. It didn't really kind of come into my consciousness that this was kind of my last shot until about like 8 months later. And it's like, people would argue with me, to kind of stop on that point for a second. I don't think it's like, oh, I'm dead after 43. I can't ever create anything new. But it's like, I've been at this for 18 years. I don't have another 18 years to find out I can't do this. So if I can't do this, I need to just call it now. I'll go get a job. I have a lot of skills. I can still provide for my family. And it's early enough where I can like put enough money in savings and, have a plan for retirement, all of that. So that was part of it. The other is like, I was a book marketing consultant for a long time. So I worked with all of these mostly like business book authors, self-help authors. And there's a story you could tell about my career, that I was looking for somebody that had a vision that was good enough and strong enough for me to dedicate my life to. And Shawn, my partner at StoryGrid, who created StoryGrid, he has that. And so like, I love StoryGrid. I love what it's done for me and my writing. And I believe it's the way that we can, honestly, I think it's how we can help writers and how we can change the world. It's such an amazing way of learning about story and how story affects everything. And I could go on about that, but it's like, I can't let this die. I can't let Shawn down. This is my responsibility. And this is worth sacrificing for, And so I think that was part of it too, is like other times when I would hit this wall, I would just be like, this is hard. And I'd go start some new shiny thing, right? That seemed like, oh, this will be easier over here. And I think it was like, I finally found the thing that was worth the sacrifice. And so it didn't feel like a hard decision. It was just like, oh, well, I have to fix this. So I'm going to fix it.
Okay, so you have this, to use story grid language. If you notice, I'm kind of building the scene here. You have this inciting incident of something's wrong, something's broken. We thought we knew exactly where we were going, and the response was poor. What's going on here? And you have a series of things that go on over the next 8 or 9 months that are you kind of trying to discover, like, what the is happening here, the progressive complications.
Yeah.
So what were kind of the key moments along the way, or the key turning points on that journey that you started to unravel? I think I might be realizing or coming to a conclusion about what I think is actually happening here.
The first thing we try when our life is knocked off balance by an inciting incident is the thing that has worked in the past, right? The thing that it seems easiest to do, like, oh, I'll just do this and then we'll fix it. So I'm a marketing guy. So I'm like, the problem is marketing. So I hired a marketing consultant, and she said, she started at like the first call. This is December of 22. She's like, started asking me all these questions about like our customers and our, ideal customer. And I couldn't answer any of the questions. It was very embarrassing. And she's like, I think you just need to talk to your community, like people on your email list, people that have bought, people that haven't bought, people that have been around StoryGrid forever, people that haven't. And one thing that has always come naturally to me is I'm kind of like a train. So if you put me on the tracks and you point me in a direction, I will keep going until somebody tells me to stop. And so I started doing one-on-one calls. And at first I had a list of questions that I had come up with, and the consultant had helped me kind of form. And I asked the first 50 people the same set of questions. Just everything from like why they like StoryGrid, where they heard about us, to also just what are they doing with their writing, what are they hoping to accomplish. And then I went back and looked at all of those and just was like, okay, what am I learning here? And I just like, probably the two biggest insights were, one, our people are older. So I talked to one person under 40 years old, right? So I would say the mean age was in the like mid 50s. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. The other thing was, not one person talked about becoming rich or becoming some major mega bestseller. Almost everybody, when I asked them about why they write and why it's important to them, the word that describes it all is legacy. But people were like, I want to leave something behind for my family. I've learned so much in my life. I want to help other people with what I've learned. I want my kids to be proud of me. I want my grandchildren to think, my writing's amazing. And it was all around like leaving something behind, which is like why I write as well. So go figure, I attracted the same people as me. And so that was like, oh, we're like marketing this shit wrong, because I'm talking about writing best-selling books and they don't care about that. They care about leaving a legacy. So then I just kept talking to people. And at this point, I'm ratcheting back a decent amount, but we're now, I don't know, that was January of 2023. I started doing that. It's October 2024. I've done over 600 one-on-one calls since then. And so that was the first thing. The other thing that happens in quadrant 2 of a story. So quadrant 1, we kind of look at the real world. Everything's working kind of like normal. I did my launch. I sold some. I made some money. As we went into the spring, chaos starts happening. So what that feels like is I throw boomerang A, I get boomerang A back. Then I throw boomerang B and I get like an angry cat back. And so I kept doing the same stuff I normally would do to fix the problem, and it was working worse and worse and worse and worse. And that was when just a series of things happened between basically mid-July and mid-August. So in that month where I realized, like, I figured out what we needed to do to fix the company, and it involved canceling the products that were bringing in 80% of our revenue, going all in on 2 products, and just doing whatever it took to make that happen. It basically was, the insight I had was like, you can't teach people writing by teaching theory about writing and tips about writing and talking about macro story elements and stuff. You need them to write and give them feedback. And we were uniquely positioned. We're the only one, as far as I know, in the world that has a rubric of how to give objective feedback on writing from a sentence all the way up to a full story. And so we started applying that. and we started seeing people get a lot better at writing a lot faster. But we also canceled all the products that were made 80% of our revenue. And so the revenue was already ticking down and it just nosedived. But I knew I was right. So then it just became chaos as I was trying to like move everything in this new direction because I knew I was right. It's also the first time, I grew up Christian, religious, evangelical, and everybody was always talking about faith, and you got to have faith in God. It always felt like this thing I was trying to have. I was trying to believe. I believe, I really believe, I really believe. And this was the first moment in my life where I'm like, now I understand what faith is because I see what we're going to build. It's inevitable that it's going to happen. But if you look at what's happening right now, it's like I'm on a burning ship heading for a cliff, and yet I know everything's going to be fine. So I'm trying to like calm everybody down and wonder why can't they see the future I'm seeing? It's inevitable that it's going to happen. And so I knew I was right. It was just a matter of like, now I have to do the things to make it work.
If you had to kind of categorize what your object of desire was at the time, what was it?
So the way we talk about objects of desire is you want X without having to Y. So we all want things, but we don't have them because we're not willing to do something or give up something, right? So like I want a Tesla, but I don't want to give up the 50 grand right now to get one, right? Whatever it is, it's like there's always tension between the thing that you want and the thing that's in the way. What are you willing to do to get that thing?
I want freedom, but I don't want to give up my paycheck to go get it or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. So what I started doing was realizing I want to build StoryGrid into a scalable, big company that was touching the lives of writers and giving them the thing that I had gotten that I wanted for decades, which is to write something meaningful. I think by the end, it was like the list of what I wasn't willing to give up was like my wife, my kids. I had put everything else on the altar. So it's like I stopped hanging out with friends. I scaled way back on my only hobbies really are like CrossFit and jiu-jitsu. I scaled those back. I gave up sleep. I gave up trips. I gave up getting paid on a regular basis and dipping into our savings. And I just wanted that thing. And I think for me, it's a combination. I mean, there's so many things wrapped up in this. It's like, one is I want to get to the place I've always wanted to be. And that's more of like a feeling of like of accomplishment of like, I've always wanted to do this. I want to actually do this now.
And what's this?
So for me, I want to wake up one morning and be like, I have built something great that is making an impact now and will last far beyond me. And so that is what I want. And so something has to be big enough and sustainable enough and have a big enough vision that it will keep going without me doing everything.
Right.
And so it involves like getting to go on vacation because the company and the freedom and that, but it's like I started seeing myself as cannon fodder to do whatever it took to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you made the shift from that's what I want, but I haven't been willing to fully embrace my role in all of this, to like really take my seat as the CEO of this thing and make these calls and take it in the direction I know it needs to go. And this whole process sounds to me like this progression of activity of you saying, this is it. This is my chance to say, I actually am now willing to give up all the things I said I wasn't willing to give up before, except for these couple, to get where I'm trying to go. And you arrived at this place of the decision, right? Of like, I'm deciding between, do I stay comfortable, is what I'm hearing you say, like stay comfortable, earn money the way we've always earned it, and ride this thing into the ground over the next 5 years or 10 years or however long it takes. Or what was the other choice? Tear it all down and rebuild it from the ground up? Was that basically it?
I mean, at the beginning, it was just figure out what's wrong and fix it. I didn't know.
But if you describe the climax moment, though, when you knew what was wrong and you knew the choice you were making, what was it?
Well, it was like the entire fundamental way that we've tried to teach people how to write and really across the board. So whether you're looking at masters of creative writing programs or other online courses or whatever, it's all flawed. The foundation is flawed. The idea that you can teach people, it's the equivalent of saying, okay, Barrett, you've never ridden a bike before, so I'm going to teach you how to ride a bike. So we're going to go to a classroom, and for 3 days, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to ride a bike. I'm going to teach you how to steer the bike. I'm going to teach you the physics and how to keep balance and let you read papers on how the human mind and inner ear work for balance. And we're going to do all of that in a classroom. And you're like, great. So you pay your fee, you come to the classroom, and then you go home and you get on a bike and you fall the off the bike because you don't know how to do it. There's a difference between knowing the theory and actually embodying what it takes to do something.
Right.
Writing is the same way. So knowing the definition of an inciting incident and then being able to write a great inciting incident are two completely different things. And so what we had to do was stop teaching all the theory and just start putting people on bicycles. And when they fall off, pick them up, say, all right, here's what you did right. Here's what you did wrong. Get back on the bicycle. They get on, they fall off again. Great. Here's what you did right. You got a little bit better at this, but you got worse at this. So try again and just do that over and over and over and over. But the reason why nobody's done that before is they don't actually know what works and what doesn't work out in writing. And my partner, Shawn, is basically a genius. It feels like I work with the Einstein of storytelling. And so he has an answer to all these questions. So how do you pick the right verb for that sentence? He can explain that to you. So that's where it's like, okay, we have to scrap everything. But because this isn't done, I don't know if it will work.
Mm-hmm.
And we've never really tried it like this. So that's when I was like, I'm just going to run a workshop and see if I can make people better in 6 weeks. And I was blown away by what we could do. I was like, holy shit. There were people that their first scene was unreadable. Like I thought, I can't help this person. They're so bad. And that guy's name was Joe. And by the end of the first workshop, Joe wrote one of the top 3 scenes in the class of 21. And I was like, this works. Like I just saw it again literally yesterday because we just started a 200 level workshop. So if you take the 100 level and you want to keep going, but the 3-year program is not a good fit for you, and we're going through all of these people, and all like the first week of the 100 level, usually less than half of the scenes even work, much less are great. They just don't even work at all. All of these 200 level work because we taught them how to write a scene. And it's 6 weeks. I can take anybody now and make them a better writer in 6 weeks, but that's risky. It's like, this is how every other writing program works. We're basically doing our own version of that. And it's literally 80% of the money we made in 2022 came from these things. And I literally logged on to our FTP server, to the page where we have all our products, and I just deleted everything off of it and left the 2 things that had feedback associated with it. And I was like, this is what we're doing now. I still feel like, what the did I do? Like when I think back, I'm surprised I had the courage to do that because it doesn't seem like something I would do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's indicative of so many things. I think the journey that you've been on, the kind of inner journey, the building all of the necessary skills over time and like inner knowing necessary to be able to make that kind of decision. And so we're going to transition here to talking about your most recent book here in a minute that I think is also reflective of this journey. But yeah, the act of courage to like, all right, I'm going all in on this thing because I think this is actually what will produce the outcomes that we're promising to the people that we sell to and build a lasting company that I'm trying to wake up realizing I've done it.
All right. I got one thing I want to add here before we transition. So this is something I've been thinking about. The first time I said it out loud and started like forming it into an actual opinion was back at Craft and Commerce, where I saw you in June. And I'm like, okay, we were in this kind of online course space, right? We were doing it different ways, but let's just big umbrella of online course space. And in general, I've seen behind the scenes on a lot of these companies, the goalpost for the company is selling the course. So if I sell the course and then I deliver the course, that's when my job's over. I've handed you the course. Sometimes there's like Q&A sessions or whatever, but generally that's how it is. Like I build this amazing course that teaches this amazing thing, and then you give me X amount of dollars. I'm going to hand you this course in whatever form. If you look across the industry, I've heard numbers. The highest number I've ever heard is 15%. The lowest, I just talked to somebody that runs a very big online course business that everybody listening to this has probably heard of. She said 2%. And I'm like, oh, people get through the course and finish the course. Who knows if they actually put any of it into practice, but just 2 to 15% even finish. And I'm like, okay, what if we changed our goalpost to it is my responsibility, our responsibility as a company to get everybody that signs up to the goalpost of what we promised on the sales page? What if we just changed the way we viewed it as like, that is actually our responsibility. We're not done when we sell the course and give you the information. We're done when you have accomplished what we said you could accomplish. And if you make that the goal, if you make that like that is success. So success is not selling the course. Success is 100% of the people completing successfully. It changes everything. Like it just completely changes everything. And so for us, what that meant was, okay, we're going to have to like actually give feedback on everybody's writing. So they're going to turn in a scene every single week. We're going to give them feedback. And then the next week, they're going to get better because they're going to fix the things we told them to fix, right? We're going to make sure they can ask questions and get them answered. We're going to teach them these specific skills because we know that matters. I tell my team all the time, I was like, everything, as long as it's not immoral, unethical, or illegal, I will do anything to get my student to be successful. And we're sitting at like a 95% completion rate on our workshops, which is like still not good enough, but like I'm still working, but like that's the thing. And it's like out of 200 and something students, we've had 2 students that said at the end they didn't get what they wanted. And the other part of that 5% is just people that kind of dropped out. But that even changes the way we do refunds. Where like if somebody gets 2 weeks in and like their husband gets sick, because again, our demographic is older, people get sick. And so we're like, all right, cool, just come to the next one. You know, we want to get you to the end, right? That is the goal. I think our industry as a whole would be better off. Now we charge a lot more. So we used to charge, I don't know, a couple $100 for a course, and now it's $1,500 to take the workshop. But that's because we actually get you, like, do you want the thing you won't do for $300 or the actual outcome for $1,500, right?
Yeah.
And so I think our industry as a whole would just become so much more well-respected and so much better if you just like, if you want people to have the information, don't sell it, just put it on YouTube. If you want people to actually be successful, figure out how you can ensure their success and sell that. And you'll also just like go to bed at night knowing you actually helped everybody that gave you money. You know, I spent so much money on shitty writing courses. I was like, I can no longer be the person taking money from writers and not ensuring their outcome. So anyway, that's one of my diatribes.
No, I like it. It's, I think it requires a level of operational excellence to do it that way, because there's so many more variables involved, right? When I think operational excellence in a lot of the kind of course industry, all of that operational excellence is focused on the marketing system. To your point, how do I sell more and more courses every time I do this? How do I do the perfect launch system and have a massive affiliate program and send the perfect number of emails, which is 17 over the course of 5 days? That's the system.
Yeah.
And then
which I'm not against. I'm not morally opposed to that.
Right.
Yeah.
You should use that system now because you've got all the other stuff in place, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, you get into some of this education and it's poorly structured. It's not focused. There's no curriculum design. There's no responsibility on the part of the person who made it to get people through it. Like there's, I guess, for people who haven't been part of this behind the scenes, they don't see how much of a problem this is.
Well, and the amount of people that are successful one time and then package that as a how-to,
yes,
it's like That is so irresponsible.
Yes.
Like
I see it all the time. Yes.
Yeah, like even when I was in the course business with around book marketing, and I was doing the thing where I was just selling courses and selling information, I didn't build my first course until I put like 10 books on the New York Times bestseller list and like had a lot of other success stories. So I'm like, yeah. But I'm just like, I didn't do it once. And then it's like, I'm now an expert. Let me teach everybody how to do it. Like that kind of shit drives me crazy too, where it's like, at least like do it over and over in lots of different industries, lots of different like ways, lots of different like just lots of different things. And before you package it up and sell it as a course.
Yeah.
And so like I usually tell people like if they want to do a course on something and they've only been successful on their own, just start like coaching people, like get people to hire you and then
do
walk
services for a period of time.
Yeah. And just show that you can systematize this thing and get an outcome on a repeated basis so that you can then when you make the course, you can like pull from lots of, but again, I would maintain if you really want to put yourself on the hook, you're on the hook to make them successful.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then it's on you. And you should like worry and be upset about that you sold somebody something and they didn't get what they bought.
I think most people don't want to be on the hook. I think that's really what it comes down to. I think people who listen to this show do want to be on the hook, but they might fall into that same trap in whatever version of it that resonates with them, because it is the easier thing to do, to package up the thing that you've done one or two times, put it into some videos and online or whatever version of that applies to your industry, whether you're writing a book or making a documentary or courses or whatever. It's really hard to say, I'm going to go spend 18 months running a services business so that I can see if I can repeat this over and over. And I think a lot of people get into this world, the kind of like online education courses world, because they think in their mind the whole passive income thing. Like, I'm going to make a thing online and then I'm going to do less work than I've ever done in my life and I'm going to make more money than ever. That was like the dream that got sold for a long time.
Is there anybody that does that, Barrett? I don't.
The only people I know
I've been around a long time. I've never met that person.
Never. But I think the idea is that's what's happening. Yeah. When I think about the people that make the most money and have the most successful businesses, they work harder than anyone I know, even if the message is build an online business, have freedom, earn passive income.
Do you think Tim Ferriss only works 4 hours a week?
That man works so much.
Workaholic, which again, I have respect for his work ethic. It's not 4 hours a week.
Yeah. And so anyways, we could rant a lot here, but this all comes back to a thing you also said towards the end of your conversation with Nathan on Billion Dollar Creator. And he mentioned something like, if you just want to run a business that's doing $200,000 or $300,000 a year, that's okay. And you challenged him. You said, is that okay? Because my thinking is, I'm not sure it is okay. And I think it's just a reflection of making unheroic choices repeatedly or something like that. You didn't have time to dig in on that there. And I think there's room for everyone to do what they want. And you said that too, look, if you want to be comfortable and run a business that just pays for your family's life, like that's good. That's okay, fine. But I think there's something inherently unheroic if you're doing that and it's not getting outcomes for people. And what you could be doing that would fulfill you more, derive more meaning from it, make more impact on the people you're serving. And I wonder, like, in what way is that you actually reinforcing a message to yourself?
It was one of those things that when we got done recording, I was like, I don't know if I should have said that. To be clear, it is never for a third party to look at somebody and decide whether or not they're being heroic, right? Because you don't know. And I think I brought up that point. I'm like, because I think the example I used was Ryan Holiday, right? It's like, the other part of it is when somebody's really, really good at what they do, it looks effortless, right? Like there's this video on YouTube he calls himself the worst NBA player. He like rode the bench, never got in a game or whatever. And then he like offered up this thing of anybody can come play me one-on-one. And he just destroyed everybody, right? But when you watch a bunch of people that are at the top of their game play together, it looks effortless, right? To me, Ryan Holiday looks like what he does is effortless. Now I know him a little bit, and I know the people that know him that are like, he's works, I know that's not true, but it just looks like it's so effortless, and he writes so many great things. I'm just so jealous. And my point is like, about myself is like, I want to be heroic, right? Like I want to do something that is heroic. It might be running a company that pays my bills so that, because I'm terrified of being home half the day with my children because I'm a terrible father, but I'm going to force myself into that position because that's what I need to do to be heroic, right? So, and this is why it's impossible to look at somebody's life from the outside and decide whether or not they are being heroic, right? And I think sometimes we let ourselves off the hook of like, well, just as long as you're doing the bare minimum and everything's taken care of, it's like, that's good enough. And, who am I to have an opinion? And da, da, da. And I'm like, I don't know. I think we should all be doing heroic things. And so if you are coasting along with your course business, selling your courses, people aren't really getting the results, but that's fine because you got your business. It's like, why not question the heroic choice of saying, what if I took responsibility for my people's outcome? I mean, the heroic choice could be shutting down your business, right? But it's like, I don't like the idea that we're not allowed to have an opinion on how other people are living their life to the point where it's like, whatever you're doing is good enough. And I'm like, that is just not true. That's not true for me. That's not true for you. I know you well enough to know it's not true for you. I think that it's that, I forget, somebody just told me this quote by somebody famous. I'm going to mess it up. It was basically like, men die at 18 and then they cease to exist at 73. And it's like, I think we are built to do heroic things and set out to do heroic things. And if you're not doing that, you are slowly dying. And so I don't like to let myself off that hook. As soon as something becomes easy, I need to go find a new challenge that forces me to face myself in a way I've never faced myself before. And I think that's important to do.
Yeah. I certainly, when I look back at my life, we've been talking a lot about the writing I've been doing lately, and it is about some heroic choices. If I look back at my life, what I tell myself is these were heroic choices. Confront the abuse that I faced when I was younger. Confront the person who did that with me live, sitting down over coffee. Choose to leave a company in a role that was paying me $250,000 a year and a lot of equity because that was the thing I needed to grow. And, the things that I did along the way that were painful, like ripping parts of myself out, but because it's the only way I could get here. And right now I'm in the middle. So we're 7 months in or something to the podcast. Just crossed 50,000 downloads. I'm super proud of it. That's 99th percentile for podcasts that exist in the world. But I don't care. I don't care about the 100th percentile worth of podcasts. I care about that last 1%.
Yeah.
That's what I started the podcast for, because these kinds of conversations don't happen. They don't happen. People like us don't talk about our lives and ripping parts of our souls out so that we can become the hero that we were made to be live on shows often. Sometimes, yes, but not very often. Mostly it's, let me tell you the tactics that work for me so you can go hack your life together. And it's like, look, there's a place for that, and I understand it. But there's something else here that is the soul level. How do we become what we were built for? And what I've seen consistently across every guest on this show is every one of them has a version of this. This is the bar for what excellence looks like, or greatness, or heroic action, or however we put it. There's different terms for every person. Why would I shoot for anything less than that heroic bar? I can't understand it, right? I hear it repeatedly on this show, and everyone who comes on this show is world-class at something. And so, listen, I agree with you. I'm not going to judge someone else's life by that standard, but I'm certainly going to judge mine by it.
Okay, so everybody's probably heard of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a by Mark Manson. and you should definitely have him on the show.
I did a great interview with him about the depression that came after that book did what it did.
Yeah. So I think his better book is the second one, Everything is. I think that's a better book. I think it's like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a is like step one. If you can learn to distance yourself from things, super important. Everything is so much deeper. And there's this part of the book that I think about a lot. And he talks about, I'm going to butcher it because I haven't read it in a little bit. And this is just how I remember it. So there was this girl, and like she went out partying all the time, and she was like taking drugs and like, up her life and like all this. And this is just like how she lived her life. And then she ended up going on like, it was like some like humanitarian thing. And all of a sudden she came home, she stopped partying. She started going to bed at 8 and 9 o'clock so she could get up early, so she could go to do a good job, so she could volunteer. And like all her friends are like, oh my gosh, what happened to her? Like, she's, holier than thou. And like, da-da-da. And she's like, no, I found something worth giving my life to. And it doesn't mean you have to give your life to this, but it's something I've found worthy of giving my life to. And I think probably that's the thread for your guest, is they have something that they found that like tuning fork resonates with their soul to the point where they're like, well, I now have to sacrifice everything for this thing. And I think what that thing is the thing we're not allowed to judge.
Yes.
But I think we, especially in close relationships, right? So one of my rules of life is I only take criticism from people that know me and I know they're looking out for my best. People argue with me about that, but it works well for me. So random YouTube commenters, I don't really care what they think, right? So if somebody that I know cares about me is like, Tim, you are not doing what it takes to get to where you say you want to be. What is that gap? Like, that's a question we should be willing to ask each other as humans, is like, you say, like, this is part of it too. Around that time when I realized something was wrong with the business, I'm like, if you just turned down the volume of what I was like saying and just watched me in my life, you'd be like, this 40-year-old man wants to be a jujitsu fighter. Like, he's spending all of his time practicing Brazilian jiu-jitsu while his business is kind of meh and his writing is kind of meh, even though I was saying I want to grow a great business and write a great book. And once I saw that, I was like, shit, I got to start sacrificing things, because I'm not going to get to where I want to be. And so that's what I mean by that, is it's like, you should keep looking until you find something that is worthy of your sacrifice. What you find worthy, I'm not really interested in judging, but how much you're willing to sacrifice for it, especially if you're my friend, I am willing to judge. And I think that's part of my job as your friend.
Yeah. I would want nothing less. And I mean, that's the goal of the show, right? The whole premise is I want to reflect back to people what they are capable of, like what their true potential is, what their ceiling is, and then say, go spin that on something worthwhile. And I'll give you some ideas. I think every person on the show is spending it on something worthwhile. The point isn't go be an editor, right? When I'm interviewing you, that's not the point. The point is find something that you care about as much as Tim cares about helping people tell great stories. That's the point of the whole show, is I'm going to give you 1,000 different examples, and I am going to do this for at least 5 years, at least. That was what I signed up for. I don't get to say anything about whether this thing worked for 5 years. That was the rule.
Yeah.
I'm 7 months in. And so I've done 10% of what I signed up for so far. But if I do only one thing, it is that every person who downloads this show will say, damn, I would really have to change some things to operate at that level.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good result. So you have written a great book. It just came out. You've written several books, but the last one was the one that felt different to me. It felt different to me. And it's called The Shithead. I read it. We have very similar kind of like inner dialogues. We have different expressions of them in the world, but our inner dialogues are very similar. It's a deeply meaningful book to me. I finished it on a plane. And last year in my life, the last year and a half, probably the last 5 years, I learned to cry. The last year and a half, I learned that if I gotta cry in public, I'm gonna cry in public. And twice I cried on planes this past year. The first one was as I was writing about my uncle's story on the way home from his funeral back home on a plane. And the second was when I finished your book on a plane. And I was just sobbing because it was so personal. It was so meaningful to me, so reflective of things that I have experienced. And I think that most people who read it have a similar kind of experience. There are some people who reject it. And I've read the reviews that are like, whatever, this and that. I just think it's because it doesn't resonate with those people. They can't relate to the inner story that's going on. But I think for anyone who has any flavor of what this book covers, it's one of the most meaningful books they've ever read. That was my experience of it. So we're going to pause there as the end of the first half of our conversation and come back and talk about the behind the scenes of some of the stuff in that book. Hey, it's Barrett. You've reached about the midpoint of this conversation, and while we take a little break for station identification, as they say, I want to tell you about two things. First of all, I write a newsletter every Saturday for founders and creators who are leading teams and companies to make an impact through your work. It has 3 sections in it. The first one is a mini essay from me based on my executive coaching work with founders and creators about how to lead well. It has 3 long-form essays or links from around the web that will help spark new thoughts to help you lead better. And it has 1 quote from a meaningful book that I often find myself recommending to friends and clients. All the feedback I've gotten so far is that it hits exactly on the kinds of issues that founders, CEOs, and creators are facing every day in their work. So if that sounds appealing to you, make sure to go to my website at barrettbrooks.com, and you can subscribe right at the top of the homepage. That's BARRETTBROOKS.com. The second thing I want to tell you about is that my day job, I actually do have a day job, I'm not just a podcaster yet, is as an executive coach, as I just mentioned. I work with founders of Series A startups and later, and with creators who are doing at least $1 million as a solo founder and are now thinking about growing a team. The uniting commonality between the founders and the creators I work with is that you've reached a point in your business where you know you're going to make it. Actually, you're doing quite well. And now the question is, how much do you want to scale? And what are the leadership challenges that you're going to face along the way? This work is based on both my training as a coach and in my work as an operator in growing my old company ConvertKit from $3 to $30 million in annual revenue. If you're a founder or creator who might benefit from coaching, or if you know someone who's looking for a coach, I'd love for you to check out my site and my coaching page at barrettbrooks.com/coaching. You can learn everything about how I work as a coach and also fill out a form to have an exploratory conversation if that sounds interesting to you. All right, that's all I got for you right now. There's no sponsors for the show at the moment, so consider me your sponsor. Let's get back to the conversation for the second half. So we're back. Here's what I'll say to if you're listening. I will send 25 people a copy of this book because I think everyone that listens to this show should read the book. If you are going on an inner journey to realize what you're capable of, I think this book is critical for you, first of all. And it's the kind of book that I want to hand to every client that I work with in my coaching practice. So if you want a copy of this book and you want the purest experience of reading it, email me, bb@barrettbrooks.com, and the first 25 people, I'll send one to you for free. Pause this episode now, email me, I'll send you the book. Tim is also going to give away digital copies. So if you want it immediately, you can get a digital copy and you can listen on for how to get that. timgrahl.com/goodwork. Is that what we're doing?
Storygrid.com/goodwork.
He'll give you a free digital copy. Go read it and then come back and listen to this part of the episode, okay? If you want the purest version of it, because we're going to talk a little inside baseball about this book. So, Tim, I mentioned that this book felt different to me than your other writing. It felt more polished. You've said that your partner, Shawn, said it's both the best thing he's read that you've written and also one of the best story structures that he's just read. He felt like it was really there in a way that if anyone's listened to some of y'all's old work, he tears into you. He will let you know if it's not good. And this was different. I wonder what your inner experience of writing this book was like, because it felt like it took a lot to get this down on the page.
Yeah. So, and I don't think you've even mentioned yet, it might be obvious by the title, but it's a novel. So it's not like a self-help book or a business book or anything like that. I did an interview yesterday and a guy heard something with me that where I said I wrote the book in 12 weeks. And he's like, I can't believe you wrote it in 12 weeks. I'm like, well, like, that's like saying a movie was filmed in 3 weeks, but like all of the work that it took to get to those 3 weeks was pretty big. It's hard to know where to start with the book because it came together over a period of time. On the technical skill level, the reason why it's like technically the best thing I've ever written is I stopped working on anything I wanted to publish for 2 years and just focused on developing the skill of writing really great scenes. If you are interested in writing fiction or memoir or narrative nonfiction, if you can't write a scene, which is roughly 1,500 words, give or take, that gets the reader, like when they finish it, they have to turn the page to find out what happens next, then do not set out to write a novel. I have stacks and stacks of shitty novels and unfinished novels that I have that were terrible because I couldn't write a single scene that worked. So I spent 2 years just working on scene work. Literally, Shawn said I wasn't allowed to write anything longer than a scene. So that's all I did was scene work over and over and over and over for 2 years. And then in 2020, so this was right around we started this 2-year journey.
Before we go through the 2-year journey, let's just go. So we kind of played with the structure of a scene earlier.
Okay.
Just give like the 2 minutes. What's the structure of a scene so that people have that context?
A story is about change. So in order for it to be a story, something has to change. So there's the 5 commandments of storytelling: inciting incident, turning point, crisis, climax, and resolution. And what that does is it tracks change. It's a formula the way E equals MC squared is a formula. Einstein didn't create energy. He just created a formula to help us understand energy. The 5 commandments help us understand how change happens. You can track the 5 commandments in your own life when something has changed. And so a scene is when something has changed that shifts the global value of the story forward. So if we're telling a love story, the story has either gotten more likely that the protagonist will find love or less likely that the protagonist will find love. If it's an action story, the protagonist has gotten nearer to dying or further away from dying, closer to life. So every scene, something has to change. We track it. So when we say a scene, we say a full instantiation of the 5 commandments that moves the global value of the story forward.
Perfect. So if you now want to go back and listen to that section of the story where we were talking about Tim transforming his business, we loosely followed some of that. We didn't get all the way to resolution, I don't think, but you can kind of see like how this starts to come together in this arc of something changing over time. And so this is a unit of story, as y'all talk about. And there are these different units of story, whether it's a sentence, a beat, a scene, an act, a global value, or a global story. Yeah. So, okay. So now come back to beginning of 2020, and you're going to spend this 2 years writing scenes.
Yeah. So I was doing scene work, which was literally like, I'd write a scene, I'd turn it in, Shawn would critique it. And by critique it, just go line by line and tell me everything I did wrong. Then give me homework to try to rewrite the scene. And some of the scenes I wrote 16 drafts before he accepted them. Also, what was going on in 2020, besides the pandemic that we all know about, was I did this really intense form of therapy called EMDR. Changed my life totally. Like I view my life as pre and post EMDR therapy. And while I was doing it, I had some really kind of weird things happen to me. It's kind of hard to explain. And so then fast forward to 2022, it's summer of 2022. I finished EMDR therapy in 2020, and I'd been working on scene work for 2 years. And I was talking to my wife, Candace, about the EMDR therapy, just like kind of rehashing some of it because it'd been a couple of years. And she's like, you really need to write down what happened just so like you have it, you can give it to the kids at some point. If it makes sense to give it to them, just write down these things that happen. And so I wrote down 2 of them as scenes. I wrote them because they were kind of like stories that happened while I was in EMDR therapy. And I sent those 2 scenes to Shawn, and he wrote back and he's like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it because this is great. This is the best stuff you've written. And this was like draft 1, right? Which is like never happens. So I wrote down like 3 more or something, and literally they were just Google Docs in my, on my computer. And then in September of 23, so I did that in like July-ish, and this was September. I dropped my son off at school, and we were listening to 21 Pilots on the way to school, the band. And this song came on just as he got out of the car called The Run and Go. Every time that song plays, it makes me cry because it's something about, he's basically telling, this is the way I interpret it. He's telling his partner, I'm going to suffer and you can't help me, but you have to watch from the other room. So it's like something about like suffering and wanting to help and not being able to help. Like we've all been in that position where we have friends or spouses or family members that are suffering and you want to help, but you can't. So for some reason, I hit repeat on that song. So I have a 25-minute drive from my son's school to my office, and that song just played over and over. I was just like in the slow lane of traffic, crying and feeling the book kind of download into my head. So it's the only time I've ever had like a muse moment where I felt like the muse just like opened my head and poured a story into it. I got to my office and I called Shawn and I'm like blubbering and I'm like, I think I got this book. And I was like, but you told me I'm not allowed to write a book, like I'm only allowed to write scenes. What should I do? He's like, just write down everything you can think of as fast as possible. So just get it down. So over the next 6 weeks, I wrote like 40 something thousand words. And it was just, it was not good, but it was just like getting it all out of my head. And then we have a thing at StoryGrid called the narrative path. And it's how you take an idea for a story and actually craft it into a full 3-dimensional working story. It's how you plan out a novel or a story. And so I worked with one of our editors, not Shawn, through that for 13 weeks. It took us to figure out the whole story. And then I sat down and started writing the story. And what was crazy was all of a sudden it felt like that moment in Karate Kid when he had been doing the wax on, wax off, and he's all pissed off. And then, Mr. Miyagi tries to hit him and he can like block it, right? It was like all of a sudden I could write scenes like really well. And that's how I approached the book, is I was like, all right, this scene has to be the best scene in the book. This could be the scene that people get bored or get confused or whatever, and they stop reading. So I have to make this scene the best scene in the book. And then I'd finish that scene, set it aside, go to the next scene, be like, all right, this scene has to be the best scene in the book. I have to make this the best scene in the book because this is a scene people are going to get bored, get confused, and they're going to leave. And I just did that all the way through the book. And I wrote the book in 12 weeks. It's like 80,000 words. And so, yeah, it was really tough. There was definitely parts of the book where like my wife like looks over at me and I'm like typing and I'm just like crying and bawling as I'm trying to like get down onto the page what I need to get down on the page to say what I'm trying to say. And so we did one round of edits. Again, Shawn had not read any of this. And then I sent it to Shawn. And then that's when he after he read it, he called me and he's like, not only is this the best thing you've ever written, it's one of the best things I've ever read. He was all excited. And we did another couple round of edits and then, published it September 19th.
And Shawn, just for context, is one of the most experienced and valued editors in a very massive industry, that is the book industry. And his success rate, where success is measured as does the book make back the money that went into it, is like 85% in an industry where that blows things out of the water. It's like 3x.
It's less than 35% is industry. Traditional publishing is less than 35%, and his success rate is 86%.
Yeah, which is incredible. So he's not like a nobody telling you this is a good book.
Yeah.
And I have to imagine that felt amazing. Well, let me ask, how did it feel when you got that back? Like, what did you experience when he was on the other end of that line? And what you're used to is him saying, here's all the notes I have for you.
There were times I didn't think I'd ever accomplish it. Then there were times where I thought it would have this huge, amazing, like joyful epiphany. So I'm going to tell you a different story. So we have this 3-year program. The second to last project they have to write a novella to finish, but the second to last is write a short story. So like 4,000 to 5,000 words. One of my best friends is in our program. Now, I'm not involved in his training at all. I actually do my best to stay out of it. And he wrote the short story. And this guy, like he works so hard at being a writer. He's put in the time, he's done all the work, but he's also a pretty kind of dramatic fellow. So he's like, if he tells a story, it's 20% more dramatic than what actually happened, right? And he's always like super excited or super mad or whatever. And Shawn read his story and like called me and was like, his story is so good. He's like, it is so good. It's amazing. He's like, it's so much better than I could have hoped for coming out of our program. Like just over the moon. He used the word banger like 6 times. This is a banger. This is like so good. And so I go, all right, can I tell him? And he's like, yeah, that's fine. So I get off the call with Shawn. I call Ryan's his name and I told him, and there was just like this long silence. And he goes, does this mean I'm actually a writer now? And I was like, yeah, I think that's what it means. And he just goes, okay. And then like, he just got back to work on his writing. Like it's this moment of like, holy shit, I've finally done the thing I've set out to do. But what I experienced in the moment was just like, okay, I did it. Like, this is the thing. And it's like this deep, it's like the feeling is so deep, it almost doesn't show on the surface. You know, and I'm kind of people describe me as coming across as very stoic. So that's why I wanted to tell the story of Ryan, because I was really surprised he acted the same way. There was no like huge joyous celebration. Shawn has this saying, whenever you finish a big project, he says, you get to have a half a warm beer and then you get back to work. And I think people that have turned pro tend to have that. My experience is, all right, I did it. It feels amazing. I'm so happy. I'm going to have half a warm beer and then I'm going to get back to work so I can even do it better next time.
Yeah.
So it felt amazing. It felt like I finally did it. And it also, at that point, any worry about what people thought of the book when it came out, like everybody's always worried about reviews and everything. I'm like, look, I've got what I've set out to do, which it's not Shawn's approval, but is him as letting me know as a guy, he is an expert on story. So him saying you have done it means I've done it. I trust him enough to know I've done it. And so it doesn't really care. I don't really care what other people think about the book. Obviously, when people love it, I love it. But it's like, look, I've done it. That's what I've set out to do. That's what I've wanted to do since I was 9 years old. And I'm just so happy that I've accomplished this thing I set out to do. It's hard to put into words.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. The layer I would add here is that like one of the things I experience in my coaching is basically everyone that I work with is either already or trying to be a pro. One of the most common things I see in pro level people is almost an inability to practice the vulnerability of joy in moments of success. There's this thing where it's like, yeah, I mean, I lived most of my life by the half-warm beer theory, right? And so I'll just add that like, I do think there's something in properly learning to celebrate things. Now, you weren't at the point of the book being done, right? It was just like you had the draft that you knew was good enough for the person that you trust to be the guide on that, to say, all right, it's go time. So there is something there, right? That like there's a vulnerability to really embracing the thing you've done and still getting back to work, right?
I've got something on this. So regret's a weird thing, right? Because it's like we can regret things we've done, but then we can also see how they were a stepping stone to get where I am today. So there's things I've done that I wish I hadn't have done, but regret is not the right word, because I'm like, at the same time, I learned such an important lesson in my life, right? Even though I hurt people in the process. So I wish I hadn't have hurt the people in the process, but at the same time, it became who I am today. So I think I really only have one regret in life. So I started going to therapy and dealing with my shit when my oldest son was 10. And I wish I had done it either when he was much, much younger or before he was born. If I had done that, it would have significantly impacted his life, right? Both of my kids' life. I have 2 boys. You know, I'm glad I did the work when they were 10 and not when they were 20. That's a big deal, and blah, blah, blah. All the things people are thinking to try to make me feel better. I know all of those things, but if I could go back and change only one thing, that would be the thing I would change. So I got this email. We gave away a bunch of copies of the book to people in the StoryGrid community before it came out. And this guy wrote me this long email, and he's like, I've finished reading your book. I went into my son's room, who's 2, and I see him sleeping. and I decide I'm going to go to therapy for the first time. And I'm like, so like I get up at like 5:30 in the morning. So I got up and I'm making coffee. I'm like reading my emails, and I read that email and I just like stop and I just cry. And it's like this, like, I think that's the joy of doing what I set out to do, is
Yeah.
like, it's more about if I reach my own personal goal that's meaningful to me. But the fact that my book did that, saved this guy from my one regret in life. If that did that, it's like, that's the joy of what I've done, is how it impacts the people out in the world. I can't imagine anything making me feel more joy in that moment of just like, that kind of a story is just like, holy shit, I actually changed somebody's life with my art. And I've received a lot of emails like that so far. And so it's like, those are the joyful moments for me where I can stop and I can be thankful for the work I've done, and thankful for the book being out in the world, and thankful for all of the things that come along with that.
I'm not the biggest Tony Robbins fan, but I did watch the documentary about him. There's this moment in his documentary, I am not your guru, or guru or whatever. It has guru in the title, and it's about Tony Robbins if you want to go watch it. And he's standing on stage and he's talking about the fact that he went through a lot of shit growing up. He was abused, he went through this and that. And he said, the work that I do is my way of making meaning of all that pain. It's the only way I've been able to figure out how to make it hurt less, because I can't change any of the things that happened, but I can change what I do with it. Man, when I watched that moment of that documentary, that was one of the deepest moments of insight in my life, of realizing, oh, that's why I volunteered and chaired the board of that nonprofit serving kids who had been through abuse and neglect in the in-state custody in Georgia.
Yeah.
I went through that shit.
Yeah.
That was me trying to make meaning of pain.
Yeah.
And so when I hear you talk about this, it's like that resonates with me. I get why that would be a regret, and one of your only ones. What I hear and take away from that story is this book is a way of making meaning of it, because it's saving people those years, right?
Yeah. It was funny because I had to call, when I was working on the book, I had to call my therapist and be like, hey, there's a couple holes in my memory. And I know she's kept all the notes. And she's like, why do you want this? And I was like, oh, I'm writing a book and I'm incorporating this into it. She's like, that's a terrible idea. She's like, do not do that. I'm like, why? And she kind of gave a really good answer. And I love my therapist in so many ways. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it anyway. Like, and I think it is that of like, I was given a gift. I don't think it's everybody's job to share their trauma with the world. And I didn't even share my trauma with the world. I took my trauma and it informed my art, right? And I don't think that's everybody's job. But for those of us that can do it, I think it's worth doing. And I mean, that's why I've wanted to be a writer, is because so many of the books that have like impacted me and changed the way I see the world, and were my escape when I needed an escape, and were my safety when I needed a safety. And so I'm like, if I can do that for other people, that's a life well lived.
Yeah. I mean, it resonates with me. We have a lot in common in that way. And it's definitely a lot of what I do by leading, I think, with vulnerability and leading with sharing my story, is I want to make these things acceptable. We have a group thread with a mutual friend of ours who we both talked to him about our journeys through therapy and dealing with our own stuff. And, I'm behind where you are, and I've always looked to you as a teacher and a mentor in that way. But collectively, it's like we're at different stages of the same journey, and he's on a different stage. After this retreat we were on, he texted us and he just said, hey, I went and did this form of therapy, and it's just like breaking me wide open. And it's the same thing, different version, right? Yeah. It's just giving this gift of like, hey, that's okay. Like, yeah, go do it. I want you to feel better in your body, in your life, in your like experience of what you go through every day. And if all it takes is me saying, here's the shit I went through, for me, that helps me feel better about my shit.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, right? But we have that in common.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about two topics that relate to this. And we're running out of time, so we'll see what we get to. But one of the core relationships in the book is between the protagonist and his therapist. And the book is a novel, right? But also I know you, and we've talked a lot about our lives together. And so I'm reading this book thinking like, whoa, I understand Tim, I think, on a different level. And while it's not all a map to your history and your life, it's like clear to me, at least, this is inspired by things you have gone through. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about are, it's kind of like good therapy, bad therapy, that I think that there are forms of therapy that mostly serve to entrench bad habits that are not serving people. That's not the goal of it, but the impact of it can be on some people that they feel justified in doing the things that are causing them pain. And then there's some forms of therapy that just seem to break people open in a different way and help them change the things that are important to them to change. EMDR is one of them. You've talked about this some, publicly some, but especially in our conversations. And I just wonder if you might share kind of why you think that works so well for you and why you think it consistently seems to work with the people that we talk to that go through that versus I'll talk to some people that have been through years of, just basic talk therapy and say, I haven't really gotten much from it. Like, what is the difference between those things from your experience?
All right. So the first thing to remember is that therapy is a job like any other job, which means most people are not very good at it that do it. Right.
Which is not an indictment of therapists. It's an indictment of just like the bell curve of any given profession.
Exactly. So my wife is a therapist. So she went through school to become a therapist. So I've had a bit of a behind the scenes look at this. And it's like a lot of people go into being a therapist to avoid dealing with their own stuff. I mean, this is the same problem we have in writing and everything else is like people keep thinking, if I can logic my way out of things, I won't have to go down into the basement and dig through the dark parts of my soul. So therapists sometimes become therapists to avoid dealing with their own shit. The amount of therapists who've never been through therapy themselves, if it's more than zero, it's a travesty, and it's way higher than that. It's a large percentage. And so my wife's belief about therapy is you can't take somebody to a place that you yourself have not been, right? So when I talk about my therapist, what I say is she took me to the darkest places of my soul and then brought me safely home. Those dark places are terrifying, but they're not just terrifying for me, they're terrifying for other people. So if a therapist starts taking you to those places and they get scared, they will not take you there, or even worse, they will take you there and then freak out, right?
Or make you more scared of it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like if I'm going through the jungle and I'm scared of the jungle, but I have a guide, and then the guide starts freaking out. It's that thing of like when the plane starts shaking, everybody looks at the flight attendants to see like, are we okay? And if they're scared, what the is going on, right? The same thing happens in therapy. And so most of the time, most therapists avoid going to those places because they themselves have not been there and it freaks them out and they don't even know how to get there. Talk therapy is great. I think for a lot of people that don't have any idea how to access the inner parts of themselves. So when I started doing therapy, I did talk therapy for several years. It was a huge help because like when people are like, what's your body saying? I'm like, I don't understand the question. And they would ask questions like, what do you want? Like deep down, what do you want? And I'm like, why does that matter? And it's just like, you're just so misattuned to yourself that like you need somebody to just start kind of like giving you a little bit of lay of the land. And the way I think of normal talk therapy is it's like taking a super overgrown bush and like chopping off the edges, like hedging it back so it stops causing so much trouble, right? So, I mean, there was one of the rules of therapy, good therapists should not give you advice, right? They shouldn't tell you what to do. But there was like this one moment where like I'm sitting in my therapist's office. I'm like, look, Paul, I know you're not allowed to give me advice and you're not supposed to tell me what to do, but my life is burning down and I need you to tell me what to do So I will show up here next week not dead. And he's like, okay. And he gave me like 2 things to do, you know? So I think there's a lot of value in that, but it only can take you so far. And so a lot of time, like, so my wife is an EMDR therapist, and what she'll do is a long series of talk therapy to get people to the point where they're ready to do the deep work. And then there's lots of ways, I believe, to do the deep work. So like my wife had trouble having EMDR work for her once she was an EMDR therapist. So she had to do something else. And so like there's different ways to access that. I think more and more are being discovered. Yeah. So I think one is like just finding a therapist who's not scared of your shit, who also won't let you just like if you're there, I don't know. I don't know how to do it because I've always had pretty good therapists. But like Paul, I got to the point where he couldn't help me anymore. Like I actually went back to see him last year about something, and I was there 5 minutes. I'm like, this guy can't help me. I've gone further than he's gone now.
Which is natural. I think that is a small version of a heroic choice, to go back to the thing we were talking about before, is to say, this is no longer serving me. It has served me and it no longer is. And therefore I'm going to go into the scary deep end of trying to find someone else who can help me. To me, that's a version of a heroic choice.
Yeah. And so, and my thing is just like, you know, my wife and I have this, we didn't realize we had this rule, but we are living from the rule. And then we kind of realized it like 7 or 8 years ago, is like everything gets sacrificed on the altar of truth. So like, I want truth in my life, capital T truth. And I'll do whatever it takes to get that. And I'll sacrifice anything to get it. And it's always super painful and so worth it. And she does the same thing. And that's like threatened our relationship. That's threatened my mental sanity. That's threatened my relationship with my kids, my business. I mean, it's threatened everything. But I think it's what I do. Yeah. And so the therapist that I had was an EMDR therapist, and she is amazing and nuts and just one of my favorite people on the earth. And I don't even see her as a real person. When I think of her, it's hard for me to like picture her like eating lunch at Chipotle. Like to me, she's like some metaphysical being that came into my life and took me to the darkest places of my soul and brought me safely home. I don't know how else to say it.
No, that's a great way of putting it. My experience in talking to others, so I only have my experience, but to your point, like talking to others who I have seen go through what I would call like transformational change in their life, there's been 3 tools I've seen that people have consistently used. One is EMDR. Mm-hmm. One is IFS. And we've had conversations about the kind of like shadow side of some of this stuff. So that always exists in any of these places, and just know that. And the third is increasingly clinical psychedelic use.
Yep.
Right. And there's a difference between that and like going to the jungle and doing ayahuasca that you have no idea what the dosage is and who
with all your shithead friends.
Right?
And
right. Yeah. So those are different things. But those are the 3 things that I am the furthest thing away from anyone that should be licensed to say anything about what works and what doesn't. I'm just saying that anecdotally, that's what I've heard from the people who use these tools to create transformation and not just like feel better momentarily.
Yeah. The other thing that people do with this stuff, they chase the insights. So they want the insights without the work that comes after the insights to integrate the insights. So
yes,
like
the integration.
We even have mutual friends who like constantly do ayahuasca, or they constantly do all these different things, or they go to this event, or they go to this retreat, and they come back and they're like, I learned so much stuff. This is amazing. I had these huge insights. And you look at them 6 months later and they're the exact same. Yeah. And then they have a whole nother set of insights, and they just keep chasing the insights, thinking they can skip the integration really shitty part. And it's like, it just is like fascinating to me. My uncle got into Amway, right, when I was growing up. And so he comes to my dad and he's like pitching him on Amway, and he's like, I'm going to retire in 5 years. This is what my uncle's saying. My dad's like, you're going to retire in 5 years. He's like, yeah. He's like, okay, I got a deal for you. In 1 year, come back and show me your finances and how you're 4 years away from retiring. I'll sign up and I'll just retire a year after you, and I'll be thrilled with that. And of course, it never came back, right? So it's like whenever people are like, oh, I had this amazing experience, I just wait. And I'm like, okay, Do you get better? Do the relationships around you get better? Does your relationship with your partner get better? Does your business grow? Are you closer to your kids? Are you just happier and more settled? Or are you this same messed up person? I don't mind you being messed up. That's fine. But it's like, I'm not going to do what you do unless I see results.
Right, exactly.
And so people love the insights. And so that's why they go out into the woods and do a bunch of ayahuasca or, take mushrooms or whatever. And then they just come back home thinking, I got all these insights. I'm better now. And it's like, no, that's the easy part.
Yeah.
It's the next 6 months of sitting in a dark cave thinking I'm going to die here and I'm probably never getting out of here, and just sitting there long enough that you change.
If you want the antithesis of this, episode 4 of the show, if you go back, was Anne-Laure Lecomte. She's a neuroscientist, author, wonderful human being. She talked very differently about her experience with ayahuasca. And she talked a lot about it as respecting the process, both leading up to and after. Mm-hmm. The preparation process, the journaling, the internal dialogue that she went through to prepare, and then the integration process afterwards. And that's what you're talking about, I think, here. So if you want to hear like the opposite of what we're talking about, go listen to that episode, because I think Anne-Laure approached it from the way you would expect a neuroscientist to. Like, I am going into this for the experience of change, and I'm going to try my best to set myself up for success in that, and then also create time afterwards to integrate it.
Yeah. And this is the same with, there's lots of ways to get crazy insights, right? Like through therapy, through psychedelics, through church. Like there's all kinds of ways to do it, but they then start chasing the insights instead of sitting with the insight long enough that it changes them.
Yeah.
Because that part sucks. And so people keep telling themselves a story. In writing, people think if I just get really good at the skill of writing, I don't ever have to integrate my own story into my writing, my own pain into my writing. And it's like, okay, like it's never going to happen,
Yeah. Sometimes we're not going to go down this diatribe, but I love the way y'all talk about masterworks and kind of breaking them down, what works about them, scene breakdowns. I was watching you on YouTube do the Ready Player One kind of chapter 9 breakdown. I love that. One of my favorite books of all time was that book. One of the things I like to imagine is with George R.R. Martin, it's like those books are sadistic. They are sadistic. But I like to imagine that he's going around killing all the people who caused him pain throughout his life. It's like every character is a version of a person who caused him pain. I don't know if that's actually what he did, so you got to go listen to him. But okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff we didn't get to that you're world class at. Marketing books, book structure, just like all the things you actually do day to day. And that's not really what this show is about, but you've done other interviews about that stuff. And so if you want to learn more about Tim's like work, what he's world class at, and want him to teach you, that's what the whole YouTube channel is for. StoryGrid YouTube channel teaches how to write story. But if you want to get good at writing story, you got to go take his courses or his like get the feedback, the workshops. And then the book marketing stuff, you talked a lot about over time, and we can get that elsewhere. So I want to move towards the 2 questions I always close out with. The first one is, I think every person who comes on this show is trying to change the future in some way for a set of people, for themselves or for a set of people that they're serving. And they're trying to make that future more beautiful in some way for that group of people. And I'm curious what the more beautiful version of the future is that you're trying to build towards.
So on a global scale, what I know we're trying to accomplish, which will take longer than the amount of years I have left on the planet, I want people to have a more innate understanding of what makes a great story. Because a great story is a complex story. So think about, there's order and there's chaos, right? Both have pros and cons, right? If something's order, we know what's going to happen next, but it can become tyranny and it can allow new things into our life. Chaos, the opposite, right? It's new things, but we never feel safe. We never feel like we're going to know what happens next. So complexity is the marrying of order and chaos. This is what we're trying to create in our life, is we need to have enough order that we can get stuff done, make progress, know what's going to happen next, feel safe. and enough chaos that new things are entered into our life. We're able to grow, we're able to change, all of those things. Another way of looking at that is like every great story has what we call a double factor problem, right? And a double factor problem is a problem when you say, what do I do about X? The answer is always, it depends, right? This is every real question in your life, right? Should I get divorced? Should I get married? Should I have kids? Should I not have kids? Like, should I write this book? It's like, the answer is like, well, it depends on your context. It depends on where you're at in your life, what's going on, all of these things. Bullshit stories are single factor problems, but they're really easy to fall for because they feel like all I have to do is X to solve this really complex problem. And they like to give, this is always the answer. This is the answer to this problem, no matter what the context is. You want to find any of these, just look at politics, right? So abortion, on one side, they have an answer, and on the other, they have the answer. And it's like, we're always right, no matter the context, and we're always right, no matter the context. Same thing with just basically everything. And what each side is peddling is bullshit single factor answers to complex problems, right?
It's like, who's the greatest basketball player of all time? It's Michael Jordan. It's Kobe Bryant. It's this, it's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah, except that doesn't have deep ramifications for people.
Right, exactly. Right? It's a shallow version, right?
Yeah. So this is like the issue here. So when you understand, as my understanding of what a complex story is, my bullshit detector is so much better because I can identify intuitively bullshit stories when people are trying to tell them to me, whether it's just one person in my life or somebody in a political debate. So I think that fundamentally, the more that people understand how a complex story is told and what a complex story is, the less bullshit stories will take hold in our societies. All right. Every bad thing that's ever happened in humanity started with a bullshit story, right? Literally everything you can imagine. It's some bullshit one factor problem story. All pain comes from that, whether it's in our own head or one that we're saying from a pulpit or one we're saying in front of an entire civilization of people. So if people understand that, so that's why fundamentally we want to teach people how great stories work, because they will not be taken in by bullshit stories, right? So that's the big overarching 200-year goal of StoryGrid, is to change, and all 8 billion or however many are going to be here by then, their basic understanding of what a story is, so that it will reduce the amount of pain in the world.
I just hear even the tonal change at the end in your voice and how much it matters to you. And it's one of the reasons why I love you, because it's just like, you're so committed to the work in a way that, for me, I can't help but be inspired by it. So anyways, not to love on you too much live. Got to keep you humble too, Who are you becoming as you do this work? As you build towards that 200-year future, that big vision, who are you becoming in the process?
I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, but I won't use his name because I'm sure he wouldn't mind, but I don't have his permission. But he was telling me, he's like, I went to this thing recently, like this conference thing. And he's like, I showed up and he's like, I decided this is the person I want to be. So I tried to act out of that. I tried to do this. I was like, that's great. And I'm glad it was a good experience for you. But as your friend, because I would say this to a friend, I was like, all you're doing is becoming the person you already are. Everybody else knows you're that person that you claim you want to be. You're already that person. Everybody else that knows you would say you're that person. You're the only one that doesn't believe this. And I always think about, I had this pastor give me this example of like, he's like, how often a day do you think as a lion roams the savannah, he's wondering and self-reflecting on whether or not he's being a good lion? Am I being a good lion? Is this what a good lion does? Is this what a good lion does? It's like, never even crosses his mind. The other thing is, the more you are paying attention to yourself, the more you are unable to pay attention to the people around you. And the more that you feel like they could actually hurt you in some way, the more you'll always keep people at a distance. So the more you become comfortable with yourself and who you are, the closer you can get to people because you're not afraid you can hurt them. And this is the biggest, my favorite thing that came out of EMDR is, in general, I'm not thinking about myself. I'm not wondering if I'm being a good human. I'm not wondering if I'm doing this right or doing this wrong or whatever. I mean, the deepest it goes usually is the equivalent of like, am I hammering the nail right? It's like not internal. It's just, I need to get this thing fixed. How do I fix it? What's the right way to fix it? But the questioning of myself as a person and a human is like, doesn't even cross my mind anymore, where that's where I spent most of my time. I was walking around wondering if I'm being the right version of myself. So all I want to do is like become so much myself that it never even crosses my mind to think about myself in that kind of way, because I'm good. So I don't need to worry about that. I can just do the work I'm here on the earth to do. I can just be a human, and not because I'm trying to be a good human. It's just, I'm a human. So that comes naturally. So I believe that most of us as kids, I call it the weeble wobble problem. When you're a kid, everybody like pushed on you to get you to do what they thought you should do, to what they thought would right. And every time you push a weeble wobble, it like gets off balance and it starts going back and forth and they can't ever find itself. The way to solve the weeble wobble problem is to leave it alone and just let it alone. And sure enough, it stands straight up and it knows exactly where it's supposed to be. And so I think most of the time you're trying to take off the things that are pushing on you and just let yourself be. And you tend to find your way to standing.
Beautiful place to end. Tim, thanks for joining me, man. I love you.
Yeah, love you too, man. It was fun.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Good Work. My name's Barrett Brooks. I'm your host. This podcast is produced by my friends over at Podcast Royale. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd love it if you hit subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's Apple, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else. And if you're feeling really generous, I would also appreciate it if you grab the link to this episode in your favorite app, drop it in a text message, and send it to just one friend you really think would enjoy it. Someone that you think would be inspired by the path that Tim has followed in his career. Maybe someone that wants to write a book someday and could learn something from Tim, or anyone else you think that might enjoy it. My guest today, of course, was Tim Grahl. That's TimGrahl. You can find his work at timgrahl.com and storygrid.com. His latest book is called The Shithead. And if it sounds like the kind of book you might like to read about the inner growth required to reach our potential in life, to love our families well, to be the fathers and husbands and parents, partners that we want to be in life, I'm giving away 30 copies of Tim's book. If you send me an email to bb@barrettbrooks.com and you just tell me you'd like a copy of the book, you drop your address in the body of the email, I'll send one to you. Tim is also giving away copies of the book, digital copies of the book, as he mentioned. So if you go to timgrahl.com/goodwork, he will offer you up a digital copy of the book. And of course, if you're interested in writing for yourself someday, check out StoryGrid. They do incredible work teaching writers how to put their best foot forward as a writer. And hope you took a lot away from this episode. We really got deep on a couple of topics that are deeply personal to both of us, and that I hope serve you on your journey. So thanks for being here today. Always grateful that you spend a couple hours with me each week, or if this is your first time. Welcome to the crew. I'll see you next time.